Hey everybody, it's Kathy Boyle, president of Chapin Hill Advisors. So one of the services my firm offers is divorce planning. We help not always the wife, but more often than not, the woman in the marriage, help her become financially savvy about her situation and figure out what and how she's going to get the best settlement for her and her family. So we help pull them out of the weeds and get to see the big picture. And we can also dissect the entire financial picture and really help them understand the numbers. So I love to introduce people who are resources to this community of women. So even if you're in a wonderfully happy marriage, guests I'm interviewing today is a fabulous resource, but we're also going to focus on what you can do if you're suddenly faced with the end of your marriage, or you've just become so unhappy that you want to exit for whatever reason. Maggie's going to share some tips and strategies on how to get your head in the positive light. So let's talk to Maggie Reyes. She is a marriage mentor and she came out of HR. So let's talk really big picture, Maggie. How did you end up becoming a marriage mentor?
Okay, it's a fun story. I'll tell you the Cliff's Notes version, which is when I got married, I realized that I felt this incredible sense of rightness that I didn't feel about my career. And I started looking for what would it be that I felt like I'm in the right place at the right time. You probably feel that with pets and animals when you're doing your animal philanthropy work. And I just felt like I have to find the thing that I feel equally as passionate about. And when I became a life coach and started becoming a marriage mentor, I really felt that same sense of rightness. So I'm really excited to talk to you today. As you know, I help a lot of people turn their marriages around, but not all of my clients end up turning their marriages around. And I think this is very, very important for all of your listeners and your community, that sometimes the highest and best outcome for a relationship really is for it to end. And that's not a conversation we have in our society as often. And so I'm glad we're talking about it today.
Great. All right. So let's start. Let's start first with the positives.
Yeah,
You on your website, you have 5 empowering tips for a
yeah.
healthy marriage, and you tend to work with alpha women who are very powerful in their own career, but not always as successful. There's certain challenges when you're both busy and both running your own careers and going different directions. So why don't we just outline those 5 tips to start with?
So I think you might be referring to the 5 power questions, which are
Mm-hmm.
questions that are designed to help you return to your own power.
Mm-hmm.
And what I want to see is this kind of as an overview is the idea that when you are very successful at work, there are certain things that you do that create that success. You're usually detail oriented, you know exactly how you want things done, you follow up, you make sure they're done that way. Very often, this which makes you so successful outside of home is what doesn't make you successful inside of home, right? And so that is just something where we have to learn to switch contexts. In a different context, that same reaction might not be appropriate. And a lot of my work is focused on that. For the 5 power questions, basically one of the things I teach all of my clients and all of my community is to return to their own power, to return to their own discernment. Oftentimes, especially in a marriage, we sometimes abdicate our power or give our power away to our partners. It's like if he's in a bad mood, I'm in a bad mood, you know, that kind of thing. And I mention husbands because most of my clients are women married to men, but these things apply to any kind of relationship. The psychological principles are the same. And I would say the most important of those 5 power questions is when something happens in the relationship, when we have a conversation or we have a moment that we're feeling emotional or an emotional reaction, is to ask this question is what am I making this mean? Something happens, X thing, and we attach a meaning to it. And when we are feeling constant suffering or emotional distress in a relationship, the meanings we are attaching are not helping us. They're not helping us get closer and they're not helping us feel better. And we just want to question them. So I think that's really, really
Yes.
important to notice. What are your thoughts about that, Kathy?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm a power warrior at work, right? And
Yeah.
I run a busy, busy business, and, you know, very good at giving directions and everything else. But you're right, you know, you can't enforce your will. So if you want to
Yeah.
eat a certain time, I'm vegan, so I'm
Yeah.
not marrying anybody. I happen to be single. I'm not marrying anybody who wants to eat dead animals. And so that
Yeah.
becomes, you know, a lifestyle choice. And I think the older we get, the more set in our ways we are, and we can also react from bad relationships. So let's
Yeah.
switch gears now with the divorce rate. We're taping
Yeah.
this during the tail end, we hope, of COVID-19. And
Mhm.
what happened with the lockdown and people living in often very close quarters, apartments in New York City are not big, even if you have a
Mhm.
spacious apartment. And all of a
Yes.
sudden, if both of you are working, you're now trying to fit in Zoom calls along with homeschooling children, and your Wi-Fi is just not strong enough. If you're in a big
Yes.
house in Darien or Greenwich, you can just
Yes.
go into another room, or you can install a cable cord so you have stronger. So the divorce rate is skyrocketing. And the other
Yeah.
thing that's happening is the gray divorce, right? The divorce rate
Yes.
70 plus is skyrocketing.
Yes. Yes.
And so let's focus on the women, and let's
Yep.
talk about if you are feeling the stress, like you're, you know, he went away every day and he was gone for maybe 10 or 12 hours, and you're
Mhm.
able to coexist, but now you're
Mhm.
jammed in and the stresses exasperate along with the
Mhm.
unknown, fear of getting sick and everything else. So
Mhm.
let's talk about that. What tips and advice would you give women to be able to get through this period?
So first, when we understand stress, one of the concepts that I share with my clients is this idea that we in our modern urbanized society have what I call compound stress syndrome. Okay. And this is what I mean by that. Whenever we ever talk about stress, we think about the lion in the woods. There's a lion, and we're either in fight or flight or freeze. But we don't have any lions in Miami, where I am, or in New York City, or in Connecticut, or anything like that, right? Here's what we have. We have the email from the cousin who's canceling the party. We have the phone call from the mother-in-law, right? We have the nasty look from the partner who whatever happened, right? Their company just lost $1 million because of COVID-19. And so we don't have one fight, flight, or flee. We have one fight, one freeze, one flight, all happening at the same time. I know this will sound so familiar when you listen to this. So here's the thing. Our number one goal is to return to center, right? Is to not fix the problem with the cousin and the husband and the thing, is to first bring ourselves back to a place where we can think clearly and make decisions that are going to be helpful to us, to our children, to the families we care about. And so when we think about stress, we often think about quote unquote self-care is like a bubble bath. Self-care is not actually a bubble bath. Self-care could be journaling, could be feeling the feeling of despair or the feeling of sadness of the way our lives have changed, whether it's because of this quarantine or all the other things that are happening in the world right now. Allowing that feeling to be present without it consuming us. This is what I teach my clients. When we're children, when we're babies, we know exactly how to feel our feelings. We cry, we wail, we move around, and then it passes and we're like, pencil, exciting, right? As adults, it's like we forget, we get amnesia that we know how to do this. And then when our feelings come bursting out, they come all at once and we have all of them, right? This is not helpful for relationships because we usually then direct them to our partner, whether they deserve them or not. So the first thing is just to pause and breathe, literally pause and breathe. Listen to shows like this, listen to what Kathy's helping you learn so that you can have discernment about what your next decisions are going to be, right? Slow down. If I could record myself, the amount of times I say, slow down, you say that all the time. So that's where I would start, is really understanding that self-care begins with self-awareness. And it's like, what have I not allowed myself to look at? And having so much compassion for ourselves to say, that felt hard and it feels hard now, and it's okay if it feels hard. It'll help me feel better.
That's great. That's great advice. And again, I have a very stressful life. I never have enough hours. I do have a lot of animals I take care of. Two are 17-year-old dogs that keep me up half the night and have to be carried in and out of the house. They're blind and deaf. But
Oh,
that's my, you know, that's my passion. That's why I choose to but it still can be stressful. So I do recommend journaling. I journal every day. And if you listen to many, many successful people, it's one of the things that they recommend. And it's very hard to find that time, and especially if you don't have a lot of space. So I tell people go in the park. Now it's harder, or go on the balcony, or just pick up get up 20 minutes earlier than everybody else, right? And I also do Rescue Remedy, Bach herbs, I think a lot of external things. So finding that center, even if it's 10 minutes to meditate and just get into that safe space. So let's go on to some more tips. So the first thing is finding your center. But let's
Yes.
say that you're at war constantly, or that your husband has cheated on you and he absolutely has refused to go to marriage counseling. He hasn't given up the cookie.
Right.
He has no intention of giving up the cookie. I mean, we've seen this over and over again. We had one divorce where she discovered she borrowed his phone and got a text message saying, "You light up my life," while they were on a Caribbean vacation together, And so these are hard ways to find out that your husband is cheating on you. So let's talk about some other ways to address the issue of the end of your marriage.
Yeah, so if you're in a moment where you're contemplating ending a relationship, here are some of the questions I walk my clients through when they're going through this. What would be the best reason to stay? What would be the best reason to go? First, just to clarify, right? It's very important, and this is something that we never talk about in our society, but I went to a training with Esther Perel, and if you're not familiar with her, she's a very renowned relationship psychologist, and she was doing a workshop on how to help your clients overcome infidelity. And one of the things that so deeply struck me and that I have so deeply started practicing and helping my clients understand is there's no wrong reason to want to stay, and there's no wrong reason to want to go. So, but we need to be thinking clearly about what our reasons are, right? And one of the points that she was making in her training that really struck me is our marriage becomes an ecosystem for our life, where our kids go to school, how we live, the clubs we're members of, all of these different things. And sometimes it may be that this infidelity is absolutely life-shattering and you cannot overcome it. And really, as I said in the beginning, ending the relationship is the highest and best outcome. And sometimes it may be that this infidelity is a wake-up call to renegotiate how you live that relationship, to renegotiate what's important to you and what's important to your partner, and to decide how you move forward. And just because this has happened doesn't mean that you can't move forward in a way that's productive and constructive for both of you, whatever that may look like.
I think that's great advice. It's a great point. I mean, one of the situations I've seen, I knew the husband, he was a very good friend of mine, and his wife lived a phenomenal lifestyle. And one of her friends had gotten divorced and now was having the life of Riley, the Facebook view of the world, right? Everything looks fabulous. She's going out, she's dating, she's going out, exotic vacations and everything else. And his wife was very influenced by that. So I think a lot of times people just automatically assume that we're going to trade this in for that beautiful life on the other side of the fence, right? The grass always looks greener. So I think that's great advice. I did a tea once with a relationship. I went over, he left for 2 weeks. He should have been back on the middle weekend. He went away to see friends without ever consulting me. And we were engaged. We were going to get married. And I realized that something was systemically wrong in our relationship for him to make that choice. And I went over to my best friend's house and I did a tea. All the reasons to stay.
Yes. Yeah, that's so important. Here's another question to think about. If you're contemplating getting a divorce, do you feel sadness or relief?
Another good point.
That is a really good barometer. Do you feel sadness about it? Sometimes you might feel both. You might feel a little bit of sadness, a little bit of relief. But just to be present to like, oh, I actually feel like a weight would be lifted. Let's investigate that, right? And Kathy and I are talking today, and it's very brief, right? These are themes that require introspection and require deeper thinking. So we're just giving you these sort of prompts. This is something you could journal on. For example, if I think about contemplating divorce, I feel sadness or relief. And that doesn't mean you're going to solve the problem with the first journal item, okay? We want to be clear about this. There's nuance. It's a process, right?
Right.
But it's a place to start.
No, that's great advice. I mean, again, this is very big picture. This is introduction to various resources who can
Yeah.
be helpful to women facing divorce or going through the process or even just coming out. I
Uh,
find that women in general, I was writing a book once about women and their psychographic behaviors towards money. Because
yeah.
as women, we're not empowered about money in a general
Yeah.
rule. We don't talk about it. We talk about our sex lives and our clothes and our kids and everything else. We don't share stories about money for the most part. And
Mhm,
men do. Men talk about it
mhm.
all the time. And when I was first writing one version of the book, I was writing with a male writer, and he couldn't understand this because I have all these little things with the ostrich, the head in the sand, the deer in the headlights, you know.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I think that what happens with women is our waves of emotion, we're not just a deer in the headlights always. We might be in a deer in the headlights on one item, but then we
Yes.
become mission control lady in the other place and we take over.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
think that that's also an important point on what Maggie's saying here is that waves of emotion may come over. You may feel anger, you may feel then sadness,
Yes.
you may then feel
Yes.
fear and be paralyzed. So I
Mhm,
think what Maggie's really saying here is find yourself, find your center, find
mhm,
what really makes and satisfies you, and then
mhm,
start to figure out the rest. Am I
mhm.
paraphrasing correctly
I
now,
think
Maggie?
I think that's like super important, and get support. Get support from people like Kathy. I'm a life coach. Kathy does the succession planning side, all the nuts and bolts and the logistics of all these things, right? I do the emotional part of it. But it's just like you wouldn't take advice, like financial advice from someone who's poor. Like, don't take emotional advice from someone who's had 3 divorces. Like, this is what we also do. We call our best friend, and they're like, oh, well, this is how I handled the most recent one. It's like, this is not fruitful. This will not help you. And one of my personal core philosophies is this: the highest and best outcome of some relationships might be for it to end, but it is highly, highly different, completely different experience if a relationship ends from anger and resentment versus from a relationship ending from power and centered groundedness. It's a completely different experience. So yes, there may have been an infidelity and you have decided you do not want to be married to someone who does not want to be monogamous. Clear as day. That is the decision. It's a completely different process, especially if there's kids involved, if there's maybe family businesses involved, if there's a lot of other things that are part of that relationship, to take a step back and do your own internal work on processing the disappointment of the affair, if it's an affair, processing how you're feeling, and then coming to it from what's going to be best in the long term for all of us, right? Completely different. So I think that's an important nuance to think about as well.
Absolutely. I think that's great. Yes. And I do see that women act again on emotion. I had one gal come into me who was supposed to be dealing in more of a mediation, not quite mediation, but close
Yep.
situation. And I agreed to help her as long as there was no fighting. I
Yeah.
couldn't give divorce advice. I was giving
Yeah.
financial planning advice in this case. It
Yes.
came in, and her first words out of her mouth were, I'm going to make him pay. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh no, not with me, you're not, because I was also representing him. And I knew I was running projections for him to get married to the 26-year-old and have another set of children. And she had no idea, and I couldn't disclose that, obviously. But
Right.
I do think that women just, they go out, they get the attorney that's real aggressive and they're going to fight, and they
Mhm.
don't put a number on this, both economic and emotional, to be
Mhm.
fighting with your partner, the father
Mhm.
of your children, for the next 2 years in a
Mhm.
knockdown, kick out war over everything. It's not good for anybody.
It doesn't have to be that way. And if you take one thing away from our conversation today, is please take that away. Even if all your friends have gone through, I've had a couple clients where all their friends went through nasty divorces. I'm like, just because they had that experience, you do not have to recreate that. You can create something different. We can be the change we want to see in the worlds of Gandhi, right? We can be different about how we approach it, but we can only do that if we process our hurt or whatever it is that led to the divorce, and then come to it from a place of our own personal power to say, this is who I want to be in the world. This is the kind of person, this is how I carry myself. This is how we're going to do it. Not that we don't want justice or equity or an equitable distribution of whatever it is we're talking about, but that the way we approach it isn't from a place of revenge. It's from a place of, this is what's right. This is the right thing to do.
I love it. I love your approach. So let's talk about a couple of ways. How do you work? You also have a Facebook group. Is it open to
Yes,
anybody? What kinds of
sure.
interactions do you have there? And how would I find you?
Absolutely. So my website is maggiereyes.com, and the Facebook group is called The Better Marriage Club. So the Better Marriage Club is open to women only. We don't have any hubbies in the club, and we really have deep conversations there about what it takes to have a thriving marriage. Like, my goal is to teach people what thriving looks like. Like, and if a marriage is savable, let's save it first. Like, let's try that. We're going to throw everything at it. And if it's not savable, you can also, I think this is priceless, put your head on the pillow and know you did everything you could to save it. And when your kids grow up and they ask you, hey, did you do everything you could? You can say, with all the love in your heart, I tried, I gave it my all. I'm very much about that. It's like your conscience is clear either way, right? So in the Better Marriage Club, we talk about different ways to thrive, and we talk about different struggles that people have. And it's a very, I try to create a very safe space for women to share, and the members are so supportive and so loving that it's like having, you know, a bunch of best friends that you can ask questions to. So I totally invite people to come and join the group. And then I work with individuals. So I only work one-on-one with women, usually when their husbands aren't interested in therapy, that are interested in pursuing other solutions, but they're committed to like giving it one more try. They're committed to like, let me see what I can do. Or, as I mentioned earlier, if we are going to separate, let's do it in the best way possible, right? And I typically work for 6 months, and we just focus on all the whole emotional journey about making that decision. And those questions that I shared today are some of the questions we literally like answer together, and I walk them through how to approach it and things like that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Maggie. We're delighted to have you in our Splitsville group and as a resource to any of our women, whatever stage of marriage you're in.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I send you all the biggest hug. I know it's hard, and just take a deep breath, slow down, think about who you want to be in the world, and let that intuition, that highest, wisest intuition, guide you.
Terrific. Great advice.